Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to be an entree to a 42-minute video that I prepared on Jim Jones of People's Temple. You may remember him from Jim Jones' Jonestown in British Guyana, in South American continent, who was labeled by the media as a crackpot, kook, lunatic, cult leader. It sounds like what they said about Charles Miles Maddox, who the media named Manson, the Manson family. Never existed in real life. Never. It only exists in your MK Ultra mind restructured brain, courtesy of fake books, fake magazine articles, fake television shows, fake news shows, and fake documentaries, which the who's who of your clandestine services entertainment. What comes to mind, of course, is Walter Cronkite, Jerry Rivers. Everyone knows Jerry Rivers, right? Geraldo, Jerry Rivers. The Puerto Rican named Geraldo. It's more marketing than Jerry Rivers. Anyways, Diane Sawyer, 60 Minutes, CBS, Masonic Evil Eye, just like Walter Cronkite, CBS, Masonic Evil Eye, right? Charlie Rose, he sort of disappeared after his sexual misconduct problems, but he interviewed Charlie Miles Maddox, but he called him Manson. Ronald Reagan's son, Ron Reagan Jr., he interviewed Charlie Miles Maddox, but he called him Manson. Anyway, we have that problem with Jim Jones. Anyway, I've got a 42-minute video. It did post to Google, YouTube, and it did post to Rumble. So I'm going to provide a link below if you want to listen to it. Anyway, what I wanted to let you know, this snippet into history of California history, Alta California, is what the Spanish called it. And we really are not part of the United States of America. We're part of a district within a banking colonial map. That's what we are. Just like Ron DeSantis, fake governor of Florida. He's part of a colonial districting map. And he works for the highest authority, which would be a banker. And the reason that I want to emphasize that these knuckleheads that you see on television, ultimately the highest authority, as Alan Dulles called it back in May 1960, when Francis Gary Powers landed his Lockheed CIA plane perfectly safe in a farm field, and then they said the evil Russian shot him down. Of course, why is he appearing on television if he got shot down? He'd be dead, right? Because he's not dead, because they didn't shoot him down. And then, oh gee whiz, they found his passport and his California driver's license and a picture of his wife and his lodge card, because he's in a secret society too, right? Just like all these clandestine soldiers are. Anyway, what I'm telling you is that Alan Dulles said that he reports to the highest authority when asked, why are you in violation of Dwight Eisenhower, President of the United States' no-fly over orders for the month of May? And when caught into a non-compliant circumstance on television in front of a camera, Alan Dulles, quick on his feet, quick like a bunny rabbit, he remarked, I can assure you that I report to the highest authority. That means to a banker. Guess who's the biggest banker in San Francisco in 1965, which precedes the Summer of Love by 2 years? Ines Mejia. Ines Mejia. She was married to Peter Folger, who had an interest in the Folgers coffee business, which was sold to Procter & Gamble in 1963. And then Peter Folger was free to marry his secretary, tennis player, partner, 30 years younger than Peter Folger. Peter Folger went to Yale. Peter Folger went to Yale. That's Abigail Folger's father. He went to Yale, and he married his secretary, who's 30 years his junior. That's right. Just not much older than Abigail, his daughter. Anyway, Abigail went to Harvard, and she was made into a private banker because her mother was. And that all happened around 1967. So in 1965, people, San Francisco was completely engulfed in CIA operations. It always has been. San Francisco has been a clandestine city fully controlled since at least 1865, or at least since 1849. You know, when gold was discovered by James Marshall at the Sutter Sawmill on the American River in the town of Coloma. I want to emphasize it's the town of Coloma, not to be confused with the cemetery city of Colma, which is in South San Francisco, at the foot of Mount San Bruno, is the town of Colma, which basically is a one-trick pony town of tombstones and mausoleums. And that's where Abigail Folger is buried. And that's where the mayor of San Francisco, Joe Alioto, is buried. And George Moscone, who was shot in the head in his office in City Hall, and he was murdered, and his body remains at Colma. And Ines Mejia, who I'm talking about, is the #1 banker in San Francisco in 1965. She's also entombed along with her daughter Abigail Folger in Colma. But gold was discovered in Coloma, 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 up above Sacramento on the American River, South Fork. And isn't it interesting? It was discovered allegedly on January 24th, 1848, but we couldn't get all those crazy Easterners out here on those clipper ships soon enough, so it took about a year and a half, and then the 49ers were dubbed as the miners for a heart of gold. Neil Young, right? Mining for a heart of gold. That's a California history song, right? Except it's kind of unclear. In my opinion, based on what I've learned in my research, I can assure you that gold was discovered in California long before they say it was reported. And I'm sure they had military teams of miners searching for a heart of gold, just like Neil Young, who's from Toronto, Canada, found in Hollywood Way, California. California is the place you ought to be, so he loaded up the truck and he moved to Beverly Hills, that is. Movie stars, swimming pools. Neil Young, Canadian, made his way here, just like Stephanie Powers did. She was from Toronto also. Stephanie Powers, little Jewish girl, not her real name. William Shatner, he made his way here. He's, I think, from Montreal way. Another Jewish actor that found his claim to fame, not in gold, but in silver screen. What I want you to know is in San Francisco, during the 1950s, they had 2 operations that I'm aware of. I'm sure they had dozens others that I am clueless to. But in 1950s, we had Operation Sea Spray, where the CIA contracted military aircraft out of, probably Travis Air Force Base or Alameda Naval Air Station or Moffett Naval Air Station or some local Air Force landing strips, and they dumped toxic chemicals over San Francisco and 7 other major cities throughout the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. And that was dubbed Operation Sea Spray. I don't know who paid for it, but there was a private banker involved in making sure everybody got taken care of. Simultaneously, concurrently to that, which I think that was happening in 1953, and that's about the time that Sidney Gottlieb was well up to speed with his mind control, MK-Ultra, CIA operation, Chaos, and his other numerous operations that MK-Ultra, Sidney Gottlieb, who was a chemical engineer from California Institute of Technology. So I want you to know he's not a medical doctor, nor is he a psychiatrist. But he plays one on television, Sidney Gottlieb. But he does have Louis Jolyon West, who is a medical doctor and a psychiatrist, who does work for Sidney Gottlieb. And he was dispatched from Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas, where he participated in railroading an airman into murdering a child, which may or may not be a true story. But anyway, he was the expert witness that made sure the guy got the death penalty, and he could be innocent. And then he went on to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, at the Lincoln Zoo, the Lincoln City Zoo, and the Lincoln Zoo in Oklahoma City, where he murdered an elephant. He murdered an elephant. They injected the elephant over several hours with LSD and continuous dosing of the elephant. The elephant had seizures. It wouldn't die, so they euthanized the elephant. They euthanized it. The LSD did not technically kill the elephant. We don't really know because the experiment was terminated for some reason, and Louis Jolyon West killed the elephant. Whereupon he loaded up the truck and he moved to California. Only went to San Francisco and reported in to Abigail Folger's mother, Enos Mejia, in Haight, Ashbury, which the CIA dubbed HAP, Haight Ashbury Project. Haight Ashbury Project. It's a project, right? It coincides with the Vietnam War, right? Haight Ashbury Project officially began in 1965. But you know what? The Vietnam War started in the summer of 1964 with the Bay of Tonkin Fate incident. So as soon as that happened and there was a clamoring of resistance against mandates, you know, mandates like the conscription, the draft, right? Mandates. And they set up the Haight-Ashbury Project in San Francisco. I'm sure they set up something similar near Columbia University in Manhattan, New York. I'm sure they did. And but I'm covering only the San Francisco West Coast operations of the clandestine services. And in 1965, the following people were there, and you should know their names. Timothy Leary, who is a psychologist who has a psychology PhD from University of California, Berkeley, but had department head status for a psilocybin department in Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, along with Richard Albert, who was a professor from Stanford University who transferred to Harvard in the late 1950s and was joined by Timothy Leary as they partnered to restructure people's brains using psilocybin and electroshock treatments in Cambridge, Massachusetts, off the campus of Harvard University that you may have heard of. Abigail Folger was in attendance of Harvard, from early 1960. So she was there when Ted Kaczynski, the future Unabomber, was there. Ted Kaczynski was also a student of Harvard University and worked with Timothy Leary and Richard Albert with mind control experiments off campus. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was attending Harvard. And his deal was he had to spend 3 of his 4 years working with Timothy Leary and Richard Albert on MK Ultra experiments. And the tuition would be free, plus room and board. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who's a few years older than Abigail Folger and a few years younger than Timothy Leary, who's monkeying around with his brain. So Timothy Leary in 1965 is at Berkeley, attending UC Berkeley to get a PhD, and Timothy Leary is in San Francisco working with Abigail Folger's mother. Timothy Leary is 44 years old. Abigail Folger's mother is 58 years old. Diane Feinstein is 32 years old. Roman Polanski is 32 years old. Ken Kesey is 30 years old. Ken Kesey had written the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a novel. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He wrote that in 1962. Ken Kesey. So he was 27 years old when he wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Bill Graham, free concert promoter. He rolls into San Francisco in 1965. He's 34 years old. Louis Jolyon West, CIA psychologist. That, by the way, that's not his real name either. He has a Jewish last name, out of New York. Anyway, Louis Jolyon West, he arrives in San Francisco, and he is 39 years old. And he's killed an elephant in Oklahoma City at the zoo. And there he is reporting into Abigail Folger's mother. Who else reports in? Jim Jones of People's Temple. He reports in. Jimmy Jones. And Jim Jones is 34 years old. He's 2.5 years older than Charlie Manson. Charlie Manson isn't in the picture yet. He doesn't get introduced to San Francisco Haight-Ashbury until 1967, and we're a little foggy on what date he arrived because Charlie Miles Maddox was released from federal prison for auto theft on March 27, 1967. He was taken immediately by Harold True, who was his taxi driver who picked him up. Harold True of World Vision, Harold True of the neighbor of Corina LaBianca, Lena LaBianca's mother, Her neighbor is Harold True, age 26. He goes and picks up Charlie Manson on March 27, 1967. He drives him immediately to the Straight Satan's Clubhouse, which is clandestine service drug distribution for Los Angeles County, on the beach, right next to where Arnold Schwarzenegger, used to lift weights at Muscle Beach. It's right there, same location, one parking lot away from Muscle Beach, where Anne Haight was last seen alive, near Muscle Beach, at the Hair Salon, which is right there. Anyway, one clubhouse way is where Charlie Manson was taken. He was assigned provisional apartment use across the street and a block away. Charlie Manson received free apartment upon his release from Terminal Island, rent free, because he has no money, he has no job, and he has no prospects. But he does have a nice home on the beach. That's pretty good for a jailbird, right? Charlie Manson is 31 years old. In 1965. He's sitting in a prison cell, actually. In 1965, he's in prison in McNeil Island Federal Prison on a Trident submarine missile base in Puget Sound near Seattle. He's out in the bay beyond Seattle, all by himself in a concrete cell, learning to play the guitar. And then a year later, they transfer him to Long Beach, to San Pedro Terminal Island, where he resides for about 8 months. And he has assigned Phil Kaufman, the Rolling Stones road manager, and Flying Burrito Brothers manager. And that fellow becomes Charlie Manson's cellmate. Now, Phil Kaufman is a control agent. He was in there for bringing marijuana across the border from Mexico, which is a trumped-up charge. You wouldn't put a person in federal prison for an extended period because of a bag of marijuana, but you would if you wanted to indoctrinate them or infiltrate them into an operation, which will involve Charlie Manson eventually, and others that I don't even know who they are, because I'm sure Charlie Manson's not the only person that Phil Kaufman dealt with. Anyway, while all this is happening, Hunter S. Thompson rolls into town, and he's 28 years old, and he's supposed to hang out with the Hells Angels and Sonny Barger regarding drug distribution activities in the San Francisco Bay Area. Hunter S. Thompson, gonzo journalist for the CIA. Meanwhile, on the political end of things, we have Joe Aliotta as the mayor. He's 49 years old. Diane Feinstein, like I said, she's on the city council or board of supervisors. Actually, she's not yet on the board. She's only 32 years old, so she's doing other things in the San Francisco area. She's a Stanford alumnus. Roman Polanski, I don't know if he had anything to do with San Francisco in 1968. He's 32 years old. And John Burton, who is very active in California politics and was a psychology teacher over at San Francisco State. So, he's clandestine controlled. And his older brother, Philip Burton, is a state assemblyman of California. His older brother is 38 years old, and John Burton is 32 years old, so he's same age as Diane Feinstein. Willie Brown is there, and Willie Brown is 31 years old. He's a year younger than Diane Feinstein. So if Diane Feinstein is 89 years old today, Willie Brown, who's the sugar daddy for Kamala Harris, our vice president, he's 88 years old. This is very important that you understand these ages, because I look at my age today and how much I know now versus when I was their ages. When I was Diane Feinstein's age, I knew nothing compared to what I know today. I was clueless. And I didn't know anything about the clandestine services operating in San Francisco, and I'll bet Diane Feinstein didn't know that either at age 32. Even though she went to Stanford, she still was clueless. Sharon Tate's father, he's there. He's working at the Presidio Army Base and in Haight, Ashbury, reporting to Abigail Folger's mother. He's 43 years old. Colonel Paul Tate. Colonel Paul Tate. He's 43. He's working with Timothy Leary, who's 44 years old. He's working with Louis Jolyon West, who's 39. Look how young these people are. These are the CIA operatives. Timothy Leary, Colonel Paul Tate, Jim Jones, Louis Jolyon West, psychiatrist for CIA, Bill Graham, Wolf Kajonka, 34 years old, Hunter S. Thompson, 28 years old, Ken Kesey, 30 years old, George Sullivan, who owns the building that the Fillmore Auditorium is in on Geary Boulevard and Fillmore Street, he's 43 years old. He's a black man. It's the only black man in my story. Diane Feinstein, 32. Roman Polanski, 32. Joe Alioto, Mayor of San Francisco, he's 49. Willie Brown's 31. John Burton, he's 32 years old. Philip Burton, he's 38 years old. And we have Midnight Climax going on. Midnight Climax is a CIA program to pay prostitutes to use their motel rooms that the CIA pays for and then dose their Johns, their clients, with LSD in the water glass or lipstick applicant or something of that nature. And then the CIA videotapes and audio tapes the prostitution session. It's called Operation Midnight Climax. CIA operation operating in the 1950s through the 1960s in and around San Francisco. We have the ARP, Amphetamines Research Project. That's going on in Haight, Ashbury using University of California, San Francisco laboratory and the hospital where Paul Pelosi was taken when he had a styrofoam hammer attack that never happened, which is San Francisco General Hospital. That's the laboratory that David Smith, who was the phony fake director of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, he had a PhD in pharmacology. He's not a medical doctor. Isn't that interesting that the CIA would have a non-medical doctor in charge of a health facility known as the Haight-Ashbury Free, I said Free Medical Center. Free. 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 So Wolf Kajanka can schedule some free concerts and bring a honeypot result in of tens of thousands of kids that might need free medical care, right? That's called the counterintelligence movement for peace lovers and anti-draft, anti-war people. They're the enemy of the bankers. They're the enemy of Colonel Paul Tate. They're the enemy of Sharon Tate's father. Sharon Tate's father is the enemy of peace. He is the enemy of the anti-war protesters. Don't you get it? It's a honeypot operation. That's the Haight-Ashbury Project, amongst other things. But that implicates Bill Graham, Sharon Tate's father, Timothy Leary, who's a West Point cadet and allegedly didn't graduate, but he's United States Army and was discharged as an officer in the United States Army, in the same way that Colonel Paul Tate is a colonel, right? So what I wanted to tell you is not only are the scapegoats young, like Susan Atkins, I mean, she wasn't even in the picture yet. She's taking care of her mother who's dying from brain cancer in San Jose. She's like 16 years old. I mean, when Susan Atkins was accused of murder, or it was suggested that she be involved in a murder of Sharon Tate, she was 21 years old and had a 9-month-old baby boy. So in 1964, she would be 17 years old. Okay, so she's a child. She's not even 18 years old in 1965. Susan Atkins is 17 years old. Charlie Manson is 31. Diane Feinstein is 32. That's pretty young. Roman Polanski's 32. That's pretty young. They're crisis actors. They're all crisis actors. Every single one of these people, because we know their names, they're media actors. They're reading scripts. If you don't know their name, they might be more important, right? Or they're doing secret things that we don't know about. And I just want you, for background, to understand that's set up. That architecture was in place before Jim Jones was injected into San Francisco in 1965 as part of being a leader of the People's Temple, which is a total CIA church facility using the Pentecostal healer holy roller concepts. And that all the politicians in San Francisco, they rolled out the red carpet for Jim Jones. All right, Charlie Manson was rolled into this equation sometime around May or June 1967, and then he was almost immediately sent up to Ukiah to be with Jim Jones, because maybe Charlie Manson was going to become a preacher. We don't know, because he got arrested in July 1967 and he was sent back to Berkeley and then to San Francisco and then to Santa Barbara, then to Oxnard, then to Topanga Canyon. Then he ends up writing poetry with Neil Young at the Will Rogers CBS Masonic Eye Estate, located at 14400 Sunset Boulevard in Pacific Palisades near the beach. Anyway, I just want you to know that basically all the people whose names resonate with you, they were very young and they're following orders. They all had adult supervision. Enos Mejia was the most experienced senior person there, and she was only 58 years old in 1965. She was 62 years old when her daughter Abigail was bayoneted 28 times with the M7 bayonet by a NATO-trained soldier, team of three. 3 men. It took a minimum of 3 men to murder Abigail Folger. Minimum 3 men. 28 bayonet strikes. Not counting her defensive wounds. She had a dozen of those. So now you're talking 40 strikes. 40 strikes from a bayonet. I'm just counting the ones that went in 1.5 inches to 6 inches deep into Abigail's chest, 360 degrees around, because she's fleeing. She's not pacified. She's not knocked out with a stun gun. All right, that's my point today, people, is that the names that you know were very young. They were in their 30s and 40s, and they were following orders. We follow orders or people die. But I think you can see from that list of people who are following orders, George Sullivan was murdered on August 2nd, 1967, the summer of love. He was shot in the back of the head with a .38. Bill Graham, a.k.a. Wolf Grajonka from New York City, he got killed in a helicopter crash using the same helicopter that Francis Gary Powers was murdered in. Francis Gary Powers is not in the San Francisco story, but he was killed on August 1st, 1977 in Van Nuys, Sepulveda Reservoir Park over the baseball field. And he was killed at age 47. And Wolf Grajonka, Bill Graham, was murdered at age 61 at Sonoma Creek in the county of Sonoma, 10 minutes away from his Marin County San Rafael Airport, near Corte Madera, where he lives, atop the hill with a panoramic view. So he's in the story, and he got murdered at age 61. He's only 34 years old in the Haight Ashbury project. Hunter S. Thompson was suicided, I believe, at age 67 or 57. He was murdered in Colorado, next door to Dakota Johnson and Don Johnson's cabin. Dakota Johnson. It's near Vail, Colorado. It's outside the town of Vail, Colorado. Don Johnson. Dakota Johnson. She's a little girl. Little girl. And her next door neighbor blew his brains out. Hunter S. Thompson. It's an integral part of the Haight Ashbury project. Not sure what happened to Ken Kesey. We know that Michael Douglas directed the film starring Jack Nicholson, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, based on the novel of Ken Kesey. Apparently he didn't agree with how that film was directed and how the script was modified, but it doesn't matter, he got paid. There's other names on this list. George Moscone had his head blown off in November 27th, 1978, which was a week after Jim Jones had his head blown off, shot in the back of the head in British Guyana at Jonestown. Somebody murdered Jim Jones because he didn't drink no Kool-Aid, and he didn't drink any Flavor Aid either. And that all supposedly happened on the 18th of November, but it now looks to me that Jim Jones lived a few more days. He didn't die on the same day. And none of the adults drank the Flavor Aid. They were shot with M16 rifles, stabbed with M7 bayonets, or injected with a mandatory injection in their right shoulder with cyanide. So they didn't drink the Flavor Aid. Just the children. The children drank the Flavor Aid. All right, that's my snippet to introduce you to know that San Francisco, besides having a gold rush psych ops, which didn't really materialize for several years after the gold was actually discovered and collected and the system set up to allow 750,000 people. I mean, if you found gold or silver, would you really tell all your neighbors, or would you keep it a secret, right? Of course you'd keep it a secret. And so does the banks, until they're ready to open it up for the peasants. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.